What's up, YouTube, and welcome to the next episode of my Collecting Goals series. Today we have a big one, as this was a goal that took me years to complete, and this is the complete US collection of Neo Geo Pocket Color, complete in the box. Overall, for those that aren't super familiar with the hardware, it's a very small library. It's only 32 titles, and of those, only 30 of them actually come complete in the box. So you would think this is a pretty easy set to complete. However, SNK's distribution of this system in the US was rather poor. I live in the Midwest. I feel like most of it was on the coasts, probably primarily the West Coast where their US headquarters was located, and it was very difficult to find these games in most markets. They did have some distribution through stores like Toys R Us, but overall you are not going to find these at your typical big box retailer, i.e. Walmart or Best Buy even. So let's take a look at a very rewarding set to complete in that there's a very high quality ratio of the software on the system, and the hardware itself is also pretty interesting as well. So we're going to take a quick look at my hardware variants, and then we'll dig into the full library. We'll talk about a couple import games I also have, and then also some select accessories that I've lined up also. So overall, my history with the system, this was my first Neo Geo Pocket Color, which is actually a Japanese system. It's the only one I have that actually has the original system box. And my local import store in St. Louis, as of the early 2000s, actually was pretty big into the system in that he had a lot of the games in stock and also carried the hardware, typically like this, where he would get used systems from Japan and bring those over for sale. So this is actually the second variant of the system. I'll show you the differences on those in just a second, but this was where I started out with the Neo Geo Pocket Color, soon after this version of the hardware released, I believe in the year 2000. The US library came out in August of 1999 is when it launched, and it really didn't even make it a full year. It technically died around June or July 2000, depending on who you ask. So overall, this set of games came out on a very quick, rapid succession, but then it died out very fast after that. Japan, it lasted a little bit longer. You could get games up until around 2001, so you'll see a few of the games that trickled out even after the US library wrapped up. So let's talk about the hardware here first. This is actually the original US system, or I guess it's a global system, but it's the original US, or original Neo Geo Pocket Color model, or the FAT system, I guess you could call it. It has nice, just sleek design. One thing that everybody loves about the system is the clicky joystick. I'll give you a little ASMR with that. And it is fantastic to use. It's very comfortable, and also just really works well with a lot of the games that require quick action on them. You have a power button up here, A and B buttons, that's it. There's no shoulder buttons or anything like that. And then you have the option button or pause button, or sometimes it's used for a function button in some of the games. The back of the system takes 2 AA batteries, and then there's also a button battery which uses for the memory function of the system, which I'll show you here in just a second when we get into the hardware itself. You have a headphone jack, volume control, and not really sure what that one's for. What is that marked as? I guess it's just oh, that's for the AC adapter, duh. And then you have your extension cable up here, or extension port, I should say, and that used several of the pieces of hardware that I'm going to show you today. So that's a pretty neat function of it as well. The probably easiest way to spot the original or FAT unit is the way that color is displayed on the screen. The script for that changes to more of a cursive looking font on the second model, or the slim model we're going to take a look at. And then this is one of the colorways. There were, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 different colors you could get it in the US. But this blue camo has always been my favorite, and my goal would be to actually get the second version of the system in the same colorway. I just think it's really cool looking and goes great with games like Metal Slug. So then I thought I would do a side-by-side to show you the slim version of the hardware. And I have 2 of those systems. One of these is the original one that I showed you that I have the box for. This is the crystal blue color. And then I also just have a crystal white or clear, whatever you want to call it, Japanese hardware as well. The difference with these is I have actually screen modded the clear one here. And I just want to show you side by side what the visibility of the screen looks like, because the original hardware is not backlit. So these two systems are both showing the startup screen with no game installed, and it has neat functions like you have a calendar, it'll tell you your horoscope, it has an alarm setting so you can use it as a personal device pre-cell phones, and then also will show you the world of time in several key cities. and then of course the settings menu to for your memory backup. But yes, these are both on, and there is actually some lighting coming from above, but without that, you can see how quickly that screen disappears. Probably the biggest Achilles heel of the stock design is just that you don't get that backlit screen, which really would have probably helped it sell even better. But otherwise, these modern LCD screen replacements are beautiful, honestly. They are pretty difficult to install, not incredibly hard. I've done a couple of them myself, and definitely worth your time because they transform the system and you can play the game so much easier. So overall, these are both the slim units. They're not all that thick as compared to the original. Try to do a little bit of a side-by-side there. You can see just a little bit thinner, especially shows up more in profile, I guess. But overall, the functionality of the system remains the same, and you get the same great buttons and all those kinds of things, as well as the clicky joystick. I've also heard that the sound is improved a little bit in the Slim model. I'm not really sure that that's detectable, or at least I've never noticed, but also a nice little feature of this too. So that is the hardware itself. It is really comfortable to hold, and I think they did a nice job with it. So with that said, I think we can start to transition to talking about the games. So I put these in alpha order. They're not in like release date order or anything like that. One thing I do want to call out is that of the library of the 32 titles, they released a lot of them at launch. And so when the system came out shortly before the Sega Dreamcast, you could get, I believe, about 10 of these games at launch. So you had a really nice library to choose from. They also did a couple variants in the box design, and so you'll see like kind of that progresses as we go through the library, whereas some of the branding of it's located in different places, and then they also tried to make the boxes more appealing by adding kind of a foil look, similar to the Working Designs boxes, as the games went on in years or toward the later release dates. But I think that'll get us started where we can go ahead and start going through the library. I'll go pretty quick, but what I want to just say just to kick off is that overall it's a very good hit rate. There's just so many good titles in the system, and it makes it very fun to collect for. So here we have the classic SNK series Baseball Stars. They did bring this to the Neo Geo Pocket Color. There also was a black and white version of this in Japan that came prior to this, and we never got the black and white version of the screen, but there are some games that were exclusive to the black and white hardware that we never got as well in Japan. But Baseball Stars, long-standing baseball series, Neo Geo Pocket Color version is definitely optimized for the system. It's not like a straight port of the NES game or anything like that, and just really fun to play. I also just want to show the design of the boxes for the US because they're different by market. The US, Euro, and Japanese market boxes are all slightly different, and ours just have this kind of fold-out design. It has a manual that's tucked into the casing here, and then all your games came in a hard plastic case with just the cartridge inside and SNK branding on the back of that. So kind of nice way to keep the games in good shape. Probably the vulnerable piece is just that this is all cardboard. There's no plastic or anything in the design like some of the Japanese versions one had. And then you just have this like vulnerable little flap here that you need to secure the game box in place like that. Just slim design overall and just very colorful. I will say that several of these had some broken English on them. SNK probably didn't really have the best translators working for them for the US market, but most of the Japanese box art did survive intact, which I think is pretty cool because SNK had some great artists on their staff, as you can see, with just even this game being an example. So that one's Baseball Stars, definitely a fun title for the system. Next up is Biomotor Unitron, which is a very clunky title. It is probably not the easiest thing to roll off the tongue, but the best way to think of this title is for people who were into Pokemon at the time, which is a huge force at the Game Boy Color library during this era. This is probably the closest thing you're going to get on the Neo Geo Pocket Color, in that it is a battle game where you have monsters that you basically battle against each other. It's very similar to Pokemon. I'm not the biggest fan of this game. What I will say is that the Japanese market got a sequel to it, and I've never played that one, so maybe that refines some of the play mechanics. But I'm also not a big Pokemon fan, so probably not the best person to judge this game. But it has nice artwork on it as well. I believe this was also a launch title and very popular, I guess, compared to some of the other games you're going to see. This one I obviously have a bias to. This is Bust and Move Pocket, or Puzzle Bobble. I'm obviously a big fan of Bub and Bob from the Taito series of Bubble Bobble and Puzzle Bobble games. And this was probably, a pretty popular game, I would say, at launch. The one thing I'll say about it, though, is even on the Game Boy Color, some of the games in the series were starting to get a little bit more advanced by this time. And this one just feels a little bit, of a minor release, I guess I would say. It's not super techy compared to some of the later games in the series. But as far as like maintaining the spirit, I would say it's pretty good. The bubble colors are definitely a lot better playing with the new modernized screens, but they were very difficult to discern some of the bubble colors like the red and orange and things like that before the new modern screens came out. So it made it a little bit difficult to play, and probably not everyone's favorite puzzle game on the system due to that. But definitely a big fan of this series and happy to have some support from Taito on the system. As far as I understand, they really just did this and the Densha to Go train simulation game for the Japanese market, where they're only two contributions to the library. But Taito and SNK kind of have a long-standing history going back to the original Puzzle Bobble that was released on the Neo Geo MVS. So cool to see this game make an appearance, and also hat tip to the artwork on it, because Acclaim was butchering the artwork on a lot of the games in the US at that time, and this one stayed pretty intact with the Japanese artwork, is my understanding. Next up we have one of the later releases. This one has the foil top like I was calling out, and this is a very popular title. It's Card Fighters Clash SNK versus Capcom Card Fighters version. So what you'll see is there's a couple games on this system that have variants of different characters, but basically the same game engine. And this is the one that has more Capcom lore in the characters that appear in this game. Obviously, there is a card battle series game. I'm not a huge card battle kind of guy. I've actually found a few titles recently that I've started to play, but I definitely don't have history like playing Magic and Pokemon cards and all that, so I can't really speak too much to this. This was one of the games that does have capabilities with the link cable, which we'll talk about that a little bit more later on, but definitely a popular title because card battle games were pretty popular, and I think people did appreciate that there was these variants with the Capcom, and then also the next title, which is the same thing, Card Fighters Clash. However, this is the SNK Card Fighters version, and here we have primarily SNK characters featured on the cover with this one. So neat if you're big into the lore of both franchises, but overall the type of game and the engine it uses is the same regardless. Next up, we're going to talk about a pretty unique title. This is Crush Roller. This is actually a very early 80s arcade game that has been brought to the system, and it is a maze game, much like Pac-Man, and what this game was also known as in the US market in arcades was Make Tracks. So if you've ever heard of that, basically the goal of this goal of the game is to paint the roads and cover the whole courseway in paint to progress to the next stage. I don't think this game sold very well. I believe it was a launch title, but overall this one was one that was easily getting lost in the shuffle. However, it's very fun. Like, I think this one is really great, especially with the modern screen and the enhanced color. Definitely, I did not have a history of playing the original arcade game, and so now I've actually played Make Tracks and appreciate this game even more. But for the few people that were fans of Make Tracks in the arcade, I'm sure this was a dream come true to see this actually come to a home system, because really we didn't get any prior versions in the US that I'm aware of. So very interesting title. Now the other thing that's cool about this, and also one of the other games, is they enhanced the play control of it so it would work great, keeping the arcade joystick design in true to life. So basically what I mean by that is, typically your arcade joysticks have like a 8-way movement, but this one is only designed in the arcade to have 4-way movement, or 2-way movement, I think. You want to lock out your directionals so that you have more precise control when you're going around the corners of the game. So what SNK cleverly did was they included these little snap rings that actually go over the clicky joystick, and it basically forces it to only move in select directions. And so that gives you, like I said, a precise play control, but you can also remove the ring easily for a game that doesn't use it. As far as my understanding goes, there's only those 2 titles that use it, but for those, it makes the play control great, and definitely a highlight to play those games with that method. Next up, we're going to talk about another game that I believe was a launch title, or soon after. This is Dark Arms Beast Buster 1999. A very, very clunky title yet again. What I can tell you is Beast Buster was an SNK arcade game. There's actually a couple of them. One of them was a light gun game. And this one is nothing like the other games, really, in that it is an action RPG. And I would say it is probably the best action RPG on the system. Very weird storyline, just very dark as far as like the characters. I don't think that children would have ever picked up on this, so its sales success was limited. But once you get into it, like, the play control of the action RPG is excellent. Like, it's really fun to play. I think the day I got this game, I was like, oh, I have like 30 minutes, I'll try this out, whatever. And then like 3 hours went by and I was still playing it. So definitely a game I'd like to go back and beat someday, but I really think that this is a true highlight of the Neo Geo Pocket Color library, and something you're not going to find on any other system. It was very much a system exclusive and a very unique title as well. Will say it had some misses on the translation, but, you know, that kind of comes with the territory in some of the games we're talking about today. Next up is a duo of games. We talked about those Card Fighters Clash games that are based on the same engine. These are also based on the same engine. I'm not the biggest fan of these, but this is Dive Alert, and it's Matt's version. And so it primarily features the character Matt in the game. And what these are is submarine simulator games. And they're very just, I don't know, detailed as far as that goes. It's not the kind of thing that I typically would play, but it does have, I guess, its merits for those that want something different. And then this was developed by one of SNK's like sub-companies, Saknoth, so you'll see some of their branding on some of the games as well. And then probably the more uncommon version is this version, which is Dive Alert, but now it's Becky's version. And so here you have a different protagonist that stars in the game. But as you can see, the actual gameplay is essentially exactly the same. I think they even use the same screenshots on there. So you really don't need both. You can play one or the other. I guess you just pick your favorite character, and then you have this just odd simulation submarine RPG type game. But I'd love to get into these games, or maybe have somebody teach me like the best way to play these. I just really haven't had enough time to get into it. But definitely something different. As I've said before, like, the system just continues to give with some of the unique titles that it has. Next up is really, from a collecting point of view, the start of where my pain points came in. So one of the things that SNK was going through during this period was a merger that was soon on the horizon with a company called Aruze, who primarily developed slot machines in Japan, and still to this day may. And they were very big on gambling, of course, and so probably some influence from them came into the amount of gambling titles that we got for the system. Not only in the US, but even globally, there were a lot of gambling titles. And so we got 4 of them, and I don't think any of these sold very well. They were actually developed by, yet again, another subsidiary company called Dyna, so Dyna Corporation. And they all use essentially the same game engine, so there's not a whole lot of variation in them. This is Neo Dragon's Wild. This one is a poker game, which I do like poker, but overall just didn't really get into this one. And then just, you're going to continue to see that there's several of these. This is one of the earlier ones that has the box art that's kind of like the transition phase, where they started to put more prominent branding on the bottom, but it's not one of the later titles that has the foil print at the top of the box art, so you'll see some of those as well. But these were very, very difficult to get. All 4 of them are just a nightmare to find. Just again, I think low sales, and then sometimes when you find these, you're more likely to find them sealed than actually used, because I think a lot of them just got stuck on distributor shelves and never got moved. But unfortunately, it was part of the set, and chasing those down. The other thing that you're going to see a lot of in this subset is fighting games. So SNK obviously was very big on fighting games during the Neo Geo years, and they brought some of their favorite franchises to the system to pretty good success. They honestly play well, and they play very quickly, and the clicky joystick is definitely a benefit as well. So here we have Fatal Fury First Contact, and it is part of the subset, the Pocket Fighting series, which I don't really know if they kept that branding up too well. I believe this was also a launch title. It has the very slim text on the bottom for the company branding, and this one has the full battery of popular Fatal Fury characters, as well as just some nice scenery and things like that. It's not the most advanced of the fighting games on the system due to the early release date, but definitely playable, and if you're a Fatal Fury fan, I'm sure this would be something that'd be big for you. Next up is, I think, the last of the fighting games that came out for the system, and this one is pretty difficult to find. This one is SNK Gals Fighters, and so it's essentially a remix of the fighting game engine that they used for several of these games, but with all female characters from several of their different series. So very much enhanced as far as like the play style. You get a lot of good quality as far as like they figured it out as far as making these games as robust as possible by this time. And I think a lot of people enjoy playing this game if they can track it down. The other thing is this is by another subsidiary of SNK. This is Yume Kobo, and they developed several games on the system, which you're going to see. But overall, I would say they had a pretty good grasp on making the hardware pop as well. I got this one several years ago, but overall this one is pretty difficult to find. It wasn't one of like my final ones to track down like it is probably for most people. I just stumbled on it years ago and picked it up before I was really chasing the full set. Next up is yet another fighting game. And like I said, I just did these in alphabetical order, but it worked out this way. So here we have King of Fighters R2, also part of the Pocket Fighting series. And the R2 probably sounds a little strange in the US market because there was an R1, which was the first game, and it was for the black and white Neo Geo Pocket in Japan, but we never got that version. So we actually started here with the second game in the series, which I think is really just a remix of the first game, to be honest, with some color support. Overall, you can see some of the things here with the link cable support, and again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but this is one of the ones that had some innovation as far as how that all works out. And overall, if you're a big King of Fighters fan, you will find a lot to love here with these super deformed versions of the classic characters. Next up is another one that was very difficult for me to find. I've had this one for a while, but I remember just even at the time, it very rarely came up for sale, even on eBay, and I think that's ultimately where I tracked this one down. Very clean copy here, but this is Magical Drop Pocket. This one's a little unique because it is a Data East developed game, which was it had a little bit of a weird partnership with SNK in that there are some other Data East games even on MVS hardware. But Magical Drop, Data East was willing to put that on just about any system. So you can find it on things like the Japanese PlayStation, Japanese Sega Saturn, other systems as well. We eventually started getting Magical Drop games on some of the compilations, even on things like the Data East collection for the Wii. But Magical Drop is a pretty easy to pick up and learn puzzle game, maybe a little bit more advanced than like something like Bust and Move, but it is fun to play and they're very addictive. The one thing I'll just say is there's just so many puzzle games on the system. Since this one wasn't like a true unique title, it probably gets a little lost in the shuffle, and I actually prefer some of the ones that are optimized more for the Neo Geo Pocket versus this one, which is more of a watered down version for the Neo Geo Pocket that isn't as robust as some of its console versions. But fun cast of characters, very unusual, very Japanese in nature, and if you like Japanese action puzzle games, definitely a winner. Next up is probably one of the all-time classics on the system, or should be one of the all-time classics on the system that everybody knows and loves. This is Match of the Millennium, SNK versus Capcom. So during this period, you had a lot of SNK and Capcom collaborations or crossovers that were taking place on consoles. Here was the version for the handheld systems that probably the Game Boy Color should have got, and ultimately this made a very distinct value proposition for the Neo Geo Pocket Color. Just as we see, though, this was one of the later titles because it has the foil top. If something like this was a launch game, it probably would have got the system off to the right start because it has so many other things in the game. So what you see here is an example of one of the fighting screens, but the other two sample screens they decided to show are actually mini games that are included in here, of which this has a ton. This also uses the link cable, both link cables, which I'm going to talk about very effectively, and that there's some cool data swap opportunities that you can do with friends and also with consoles, and definitely extended to the life of this title. Very, very fun game to play, works excellent with the clicky joystick. I just think that if I'm going to reach for one of the fighters on the game, on the system, this is probably the one, and there's less reason to go for any of the lesser titles, just because this one's so excellent. So, very fun and has a great cast of characters in it. Next up is really one of the classics that SNK was known for during this time. The Nazca-developed Metal Slug games on the MVS hardware are well received, and of course we needed Metal Slug on the go. So first up came Metal Slug First Mission. I remember being very excited to get this game whenever I first got a Neo Geo Pocket Color, but then ultimately I ended up getting the second game first. And this one is, now that I went back to this one after having the second game first, it's a little bit watered down, but it is definitely fun. It's not like as robust as any of the Metal Slug home games as far as the artwork or anything like that, or the gameplay, but it is definitely very fun and fast as you would expect, and has some cool artwork on it. The one that I think is the one to start with, though, is the sequel, and like I said, I had this game first. This is Metal Slug Second Mission. Came out a little later. You got the foil artwork on there. Beautiful box art on this one. More mini games, more levels, more stages, more enemies. Basically, they just made more of everything that made the first game good, and they made it play even more robust. So very fun to play this. And as you can see, this one has a notation here that you must play it on the Neo Geo Pocket Color. So some games you could backwards compatible with the black and white system, but this one only works with Neo Geo Pocket Color. which in the US, that's all we had, so it really didn't matter, right? But very fun game, and if you like Metal Slug, this one is a great translation, even for a handheld, even if you're familiar with the console games. Alright, well, if you've been watching my recent pickups videos, you know that this was literally the thorn in my side for this whole collection. This is Neo 21 Blackjack, and it is one of the gambling titles, or part of the Pocket Casino series, as it says here. Absolute nightmare to find this game. I mean, years of hunting, years of visiting game conventions, video game stores. Never once saw this game in person, complete in the box. Just finally had to pony up the money and get one off eBay, but even on eBay, this game doesn't pop up all that often, albeit you're more likely, again, to find these sealed than not. But very, very happy to get this game. It is a very weak game of blackjack, and unfortunately not a whole lot more to say about it other than just what a nightmare game to find. Another one of the games that was very, very difficult for me to get, very similar in theme, also part of the Pocket Casino series, is Neo Cherry Master Color. This one is just simply a slot machine game, same game developer, Dyna, that did all these casino titles. They also had black branding on the side of the box. I guess I should show that, just because it makes them a little bit different than your typical white-dominated boxes that you had on most of the games. But overall, like, not that fun. It's just a slot machine game. Obviously didn't sell well, and makes it very difficult to complete or get a complete set for the system, just because of some of the titles like this. Next up is a soccer game, or football if you prefer. This is Neo Geo Cup 98 Plus Color. Wow, what a title. So let's break that down. Now we have another subset. This is the Pocket Sports series. The color is because there was a Neo Geo Cup 98 for the black and white system that we obviously didn't get here. And then I guess the plus and then the color is what makes this one the unique version. I don't know what's going on with the box art on this one. They did such a nice job with the box art on most of these games. This one, I just don't think it sold it at all. But as far as the actual gameplay, it has fun characters in it. It does have some sim pieces included in the game, which you can like trade players and do some customization, things like that. I'm just not the biggest soccer fan, but overall I would say if you are, this is a good, solid title to play, very arcadey, and you can get through the games very quickly if you're in a rush. So nice little feature there. But Neo Geo was known, especially in the arcades, for great sports games, and I would say overall, most of these do hold up. I just think that if they wanted to break the US market, they didn't need a soccer game, they needed a football game, a US football game, and American football is obviously what most people wanted to play at this time, and probably would have made the game, the system sell better if there was something available. So now we are back to our final gambling title, more of these. This one is Neo Mystery Bonus, and if you didn't get enough slot machine games, it's another slot machine game. Yes, there were 2 of these released in the US, and I think there were probably 4 or 5 in Japan. They had a ton of these. It's more of the same, it's the same game engine. It's kind of sad that they released both of these, because honestly, if you have one, you've had them both. There's very little variation as far as the heads-up display and how the game plays. But yeah, I guess that just really makes these difficult to get. This one wasn't as hard to find. I think of the 4 gambling games, this was the first one I found. But even then, like, just finding any of these in person is very, very difficult. Alright, let's get back into another sports title. So here we are again, back in the Pocket Sports series. This is Neo Turf Masters, a very well-respected game on MVS hardware. The Neo Geo Pocket Color version isn't just a chopped-down version of the arcade game. It has really been optimized for the system, and it's very fun. It's missing some of the classic voice clips that the arcade game had, but it is very fun to play. I'm not even a golf fan, and I can zone out and play this game, and I think that's probably the greatest compliment you can give to any sports game, is that even for somebody who's not a fan of the actual sport, if you can enjoy playing the game, it's doing its job. A lot of variation as far as the different modes of play. Very fun cast of characters here, as you can imagine, with some funny animations between stages, and very rewarding to play. Probably blows away any golf game that there was on any of the other portable systems at the time, and overall wish this was a bigger hit in the US for that reason. Alright, next up we have Pac-Man. And you're probably thinking, yay, Pac-Man. You can get that on any system. But let me tell you, this version is different, and why this one is special is really just some of the love that Namco put into this title to making it really adapt well to the Neo Geo Pocket Color. It has a few different versions of the screen, so you can do a true arcade-style full-screen type. Obviously, it makes the screen very, very small to do that, but with the enhanced LCD mod, yes, it actually is legible to play it that way. Probably you're more likely to play the scrolling version of the game, where the screen is chopped down and scrolling different sections. A little bit less authentic to the arcade, but probably better. But why this game is truly special, this version of it for the handheld, is because it also came with the little ring for the lockout control, and it works great with this. Again, it locks out your controls so you can only move in the 4 directions, and it makes the game probably play better than any other home version just because of that. I have always loved this version of the game. It was one of my first titles I owned for the Neo Geo Pocket Color, and I will sing the praises of this even for people that are just so bored with Pac-Man, and that this one gives you something different to look forward to as you use it with the lockout ring controller. So this and Make Tracks are really fun, and I think the innovation of this was really cool. They do give you 2 of these in each box too, so if you lose one, you're not totally up a creek. And you have a backup as well. Alright, next we'll talk about a game that probably was destined to help the system move hardware, and I don't really think it did. But Sega even got in the mix with supporting the Neo Geo Pocket Color, and that they gave us a version of Sonic Adventure, or the Dreamcast game, Sonic the Hedgehog Pocket Adventure is the full title in this one. And overall, it plays more like the Sega Genesis games. It is 2D in nature, but it has that Sonic Adventure branding on it, like the Dreamcast game that was contemporary at the time that this came out. It does have some mini-games included, things like that. I think if you are a big fan of the Sega Genesis era Sonic games, you will enjoy this one. I honestly am not the biggest fan of those. I didn't really grow up with those because I was more of a Mario kid at the time. But for those that are, I think you'll enjoy this game as well. They did actually release a US bundled version of the hardware with this game inside, and had Sonic branding on the box. Definitely, again, I think intended to be a big system seller, but overall I think it just got lost in the shuffle, or maybe Sonic's branding at the time really wasn't that big, because in the late 90s it wasn't the peak era after all those Saturn Sonic games that ended up being kind of duds. So, wish this game could have survived or made the system a big hit, but it probably didn't in the long run. Next up is another very, very difficult game to find for the system. This one gave me nightmares as well, trying to track it down. This is Shanghai Mini, and Shanghai has been around, I believe, since the mid-'80s as a computer game. Activision, of all people, originally developed it. And basically they made a puzzle game by making a tile matching game out of Mahjong tiles. So if you're scared by seeing what you see here with the Mahjong tiles, it's not a true Mahjong game. It's actually very rewarding to play. It is kind of calming as you play and match the tiles in single player mode, but it also has some multiplayer modes you can do with the link-up cable. I think that really I've liked Shanghai on home systems as well. It came out on the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation here in the US. So honestly, this was just more of the same to me, but it was fun to play. The one thing I will say is that without a modded screen, you can see how many tiles are on the screen, and telling those apart would probably be very, very difficult. But now, obviously, with the upgraded screens, it's not a problem. Just be aware if you play this game on an original hardware that hasn't been modified. All right, we are back to the Pocket Fighting series, and so this is yet another classic SNK franchise. We have Samurai Showdown 2. Samurai Showdown 1, I can't remember if that was a black and white title, and that's why we got Samurai Showdown 2, or if they just chose to go with this cast of characters for the portable version. It's really more of the same. It plays well. There's nothing that distinctive about it. But there's nothing wrong with it either. So if you are a Samurai Showdown as your dominant franchise, this is probably the one you'll gravitate to. Obviously, super deformed versions of the characters that we know and love from that series, and more fun as far as the clicky stick to play it. Next up, we're going to talk about a puzzle game series that is unique to the hardware. So these were developed specifically for the system, and they are super fun. This is the Puzzle Link series, and basically it is it's kind of a mix of Magical Drop and also something like Bust-A-Move. It'd be the best way to explain it. You're doing some color matching, but you're also picking up things off the board and moving them to other places on the board like you do with Magical Drop. So it's kind of like they took the best of those other two puzzle games and made it their own thing. Very fun game, also by the company Yume Kobo, and just cool cast of characters. I wish they could have got this franchise off the ground, whereas more people would know and love it. Unfortunately, there's no like MBS arcade version of it, but I think it had the potential to be. It really was a robust puzzle game, which I was a big fan of at the time, and if I'd known about this game even back then, I probably would have bought it much sooner. So can highly recommend that one. But what I would also recommend is the sequel. So Puzzle Link 2, this was one of the late titles, as you can see by the foil. Yume Kobo branding again here by the company that developed it. And it's really more of the same, although they enhanced, the card collecting, which was huge at the time. If you weren't card battling, you were card collecting. And so a lot of games during this era had card collecting functions where really you were just collecting game artwork or character artwork. But it was something to keep you playing, and you had to chase, those by playing repeatedly through the different stages. So obviously it's just more of the same, but it's more robust. The graphics honestly didn't get a big boost in part 2, but overall they changed up the stages and kept it fresh. I guess if you're going to start with one or the other, this is the one to start with, but you can't go wrong with either one. They're really fun games. And then we have yet another action puzzle title. So another classic franchise that had to make its way onto the system. Here we have Puyo Pop, which is part of the Puyo Puyo series, which has been around since the early 90s. Compile, I don't know if they actually developed this game, but it's obviously a Compile franchise, which was part of Sega by this point. And you have the classic cast of characters from all of those. I like Puyo Puyo, but honestly, it was getting a little long in the tooth by the time this came out, and it didn't really feel like it offered something that new that you couldn't get with some of the other action puzzle titles. So I would probably be less likely to go with this one over one of the other games if I was going to play it. But there's nothing wrong with it. It plays functionally fine, and if you like the characters in this game, you'll have fun with this one too. So, since I'm a big fan of these action puzzle titles, I think it's great that we got, I think, 5 of them in the US on the library here, and ultimately there's no bad ones. They're just all very similar in nature, and Puzzle Link is my favorite of the whole batch, but definitely recognizable characters here if you like it. I will say this one was pretty hard to find also. It almost seems like since I got it, it's become even more difficult to find. I very rarely see this game for sale. Not really sure what the story is on that one, other than just had limited appeal in the US. And then now we are at the final game that came complete in the box. This is another of the Pocket Sports series. Here we have Pocket Tennis Color, and it is another Yume Kobo developed game. I like, actually, tennis video games pretty well. I mean, there's some great classics through the years, things like Virtua Tennis. I wish I could say that this was a classic. It really is kind of difficult to play. I don't know, it just isn't optimized for the system the way it should be, considering it is exclusive game for the system. But overall, I would much rather play something like Turf Masters than this. I just think that maybe if you are a big tennis fan, you'll get more out of it than I did. But again, I just think that of the sports games that we got in the US, they missed some of the key ones that probably would have made the system a bigger seller. We didn't get a basketball game, we didn't get a hockey game, and we didn't get an American football game, which probably all 3 would have sold better than the ones that you're seeing here, maybe other than Baseball Stars. So that was another, I think, launch title, but it is probably one of the more difficult ones to find just because I think tennis had limited appeal in the US. All right. So that is 30 titles you've seen so far in complete in the box. The one thing I did not chase down is there are some variants which are really odd. They're like early release Euro versions in plastic snap cases with a US ESRB sticker stuffed on the cover. I think they were having some distribution issues at launch, and it was a quick way to get more games in the US shelves. They're just duplicates of like 3 or 4 of the titles that you see here, and ultimately I decided I'm not going to chase those down because they're just not really that unique, and ultimately it's just the US or the ESRB stickers the only thing that makes them different. But there was 2 other things I did have to chase down for the complete set, and that is these 2 oddballs that don't come in cardboard boxes with manuals. They were only sold after the system was dead and distributors had extra hardware and games that they didn't know what to do with that didn't have matching boxes and manuals, or they were just looking for a way to ship them out in bulk very easily. So they actually just shipped them out cartridge only in a mixed pack of like 4 to 6 titles, sometimes even with the system hardware bundled in. And with that, you got the 2 final games on the US system that never got their own dedicated box and manual. The interesting thing about these is they're actually really fun games, and it's a shame that neither of these got a full box and manual here like they did in Europe and Japan. But the first one of these is, I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation of this one, because it's a very Japanese title. It's Fasalei. That's the closest thing I can get to it. What it is a strategy action game, which is like grid-based, probably a little bit more traditional than something like Dive Alert. And ultimately very fun. It's like a tank, sim type of game, I guess would be the best way to put it. Action strategy type of game. Very detailed, battles, I guess, to get into. takes a little bit of learning curve. I've played through a couple of the different stages, or sorties, I guess you would call them. I'd like to play this one more, honestly, but it is a little bit difficult to find. You do need to make sure, if you're tracking this one down, that it has the ESRB rating. That's the only thing that makes the US version unique as far as the cartridge. But it does have US translated English in it, which is great, because the Japanese version plays in Japanese, unfortunately. Very much a shame that this one was canceled essentially in the US, because several US magazines actually reviewed this game and reviewed it very, very highly before SNK pulled the plug on their operations with this hardware. The other one I want to talk about is The Last Blade, and this one is similar story, was only sold through those wholesaler packs, has an ESRB rating on it there to make it unique. Honestly, of all the fighting games on the system, this one plays incredibly smooth, and I've always liked Last Blade. It's probably one of my favorite SNK franchises, because you've got their great character art, but it's also a sword battle game, or weapons-based battle, as compared to some of the other ones, which are just fists. And so I've really always liked this series, and I think that this one translates very well to Neo Geo Pocket Color. Again, just a shame we didn't get a true box and manual for this one, but very fun game. So that is the complete set of the 32 titles on the system. I'm going to show you a few other things here before we wrap up, but I can just tell you that this is an incredibly challenging set if you want all these complete in the box with all the manuals, boxes, and all that kind of stuff. If you just want loose cartridges, maybe not as unbearable to track all this down, but wow, what a series to collect. I do think that it's just great that all the boxes are so colorful, they have great Japanese character art on them. Really made it rewarding for me to continue staying motivated, knowing how difficult this was to go ahead and track them all down. So I just want to show you very briefly a few Japanese titles. I am not going for the full Japanese exclusive set, but these were three that were appealing to me. I may start to get a few others, as now that I've completed this, I need some other stuff to track down for the hardware. But this is a game that we were technically scheduled to get in the US. I think it just got the plug pulled on it just due to timing. It's yet another baseball game. It's Dynamite Slugger. And this one was developed by 80K, which also had a great relationship with SNK. Overall, I will say it's not that much different than Baseball Stars as far as like what it brings to the hardware. So I can see that, like, understand why this got canceled. It's not like it's anything that you had to play if you didn't already have Baseball Stars. But Japan loved baseball, so it made sense that there was a couple options at least for the system. Box art's, I don't know, a little bland compared to that Baseball Stars art, but the actual game character art is pretty cool, as you can see on the box here too, which is neat. Then we have Ganbare Neo Poke-kun, which is a life simulation game, and it also has some elements like WarioWare with microgames included, which is the main reason why I was drawn to this. Very, very weird game, would have never gotten released here, but the microgames are very easy to pick up and play. The nice thing about my cartridge is it had a save file on it where most of the micro games were already unlocked, and so I can kind of go straight to those without dealing with some of the more sim heavy aspects of the traditional game. But basically you have this guy in an apartment and you get to manipulate people that interact with him and devices around the apartment, and basically make his life happy or a living hell. It's your choice, but if you make him happy, that's when he'll make the micro games for you. So very unique concept. I remember magazines writing about it when it came out, but again, something we would have never seen here. The last one I have for the Japanese library that's exclusive is Delta Warp. This was a later title for the system. This one I've actually owned a really long time. My local import shop carried this back in the day, and I decided to grab it. It is yet again another action puzzle game, but this one's a little bit more ornate, I guess I would say, than the arcade-style ones that most of the ones we got here. Has a unique concept to it as far as how the pieces work together. It's a little bit difficult to learn, but once you get it down, it's not too bad. And then here we have another developer, Iosis. I don't know a whole lot about them, but maybe they made a couple other games for the system as well. And the box art, I don't know, is a little bland, but honestly it's a pretty cool game for the system, and would have been neat if we got this, but understandably so we didn't, just due to the release timing of it. Alright, well, we are almost at the close, but I do want to talk about some of the accessories, because what system is complete without accessories to play with it? So here we have some complete-in-the-box accessories that SNK released. The first one of these is just the boring AC adapter for the system. Honestly, the system has great battery life, so there's been little need to use this, but it does have an official AC adapter here, which you can see. And I didn't have this back in the day. I got this somewhat recently, but I just thought it was cool to have for the original box art and all that kind of stuff. But this is what you would have seen on game store shelves at the time, and this was the US spec version of that. The next accessory is the System Link cable, and this is to hook two Neo Geo Pocket Color systems together. Many of the games I showed you actually support this very well, especially all the fighting games, and even things like the puzzle games. Many of those use it as well for two-player mode. This is actually the Japanese version of the Link cable, but the US box art is very similar to this, and they're exactly the same inside the box. But definitely a great accessory to have if you have a couple Neo Geo Pocket Colors, as I do. Obviously, I need to get extra copies of some of the games if I want to use this function, but definitely fun to play with that as well. Now we have the one that I really think is cool, and this is maybe one that not everybody knows about, but this is the Neo Geo Pocket Sega Dreamcast Link. And so this hooks the Neo Geo Pocket Color to your Sega Dreamcast, and it lets you swap data with several of the compatible titles that both hardwares had, such as some of the SNK versus Capcom games and King of Fighters series games. Very cool how they integrated that. I think system communication was definitely in its early days before, Wi-Fi and all that was widespread and Bluetooth. But this was a very unique piece of hardware. I don't think there ever was an official US release of this, but several of these made it into the US market because a lot of people were curious how this all worked. The overall link cable has just kind of a little box, I guess you could say, in between the two ends of it. So I guess there's some data processing going on in there or something like that. But this is what the original box looks like for this. And cool communication between the two pieces of hardware. And then the last accessory I want to show is an unlicensed one, but this is a popular one. This was the Nyko Power Worm Light. Nyko made worm lights for the Game Boy Color at the same time period, and they were very popular because that system also was not backlit. So back in the day, this was really the best way to play the system at night, was to have this goofy little light hovering over your Neo Geo Pocket Color. Overall, something I'm never going to use now that I have these modded systems, but definitely was neat at the time. They tried to include some bonus value. They gave you a rechargeable battery pack, and then also another AC adapter came with this, all in one. And a very popular accessory at the time. Much more so in the Game Boy Color, but for those that actually were into the Neo Geo Pocket Color, I think this was a big hit. It's just sad that SNK didn't find a way to backlight it from the factory, or maybe make their own factory accessory that might have been even better. But that about does it. So hopefully you enjoyed this tour through the Neo Geo Pocket Color library. Very fun set, like I said, to collect, but very, very difficult. I'm curious if any of you are going for it. You can let me know in the comments. Let me know how far along you are, and maybe which games are your pain points as well if you're going for the set. But thank you very much for watching. Please take a moment, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think, and I will talk to you soon. Have a great day or night, wherever you are.